They waited with defended certainty, waited with comfortable confidence, waited knowing exactly what would happen next, because what would happen next is what always happened. You'd break first. You'd reach out first. You'd beg for connection first. You'd prove through breaking and reaching and begging that you needed relationship more than they needed relationship, that you were weaker, that you were more dependent. That defended position was superior position because you'd always be one pursuing while they remained defended. The waiting was comfortable, was them sitting back in defended certainty that pattern would repeat, pattern that repeated throughout entire relationship, pattern where they withdrew and you pursued. They created distance and you closed distance. They went silent and you reached out desperate to restore connection. Pattern was reliable, was predictable, was foundation of their defended comfort, knowing they could withdraw and you'd pursue, knowing they could create distance and you'd bridge, knowing they could go silent and you'd beg for them to speak. So they withdrew this time, created distance this time, went silent this time, and they waited for what always came next, waited for your pursuing, waited for your desperate texts asking what's wrong, waited for your calls trying to restore connection, waited for your begging them to come back, waited for your proving once again that defended position worked because you couldn't sustain absence they created. They waited comfortably. They waited confidently. They waited certain you'd break because you always broke, certain you'd beg because you always begged, certain pattern would repeat because pattern always repeated. They were wrong, completely wrong, fundamentally miscalculated, because this time was different. This time, you didn't break, didn't pursue, didn't beg, didn't play the role pattern assigned you. This time, you stayed silent, completely silent, totally absent, absolutely unavailable. And your silence, your sustained, complete silence, created something specific, created something their waiting didn't anticipate, created something that happened because you stayed silent instead of begging. Understanding what happened when you stayed silent reveals what their waiting was based on. Why silence destroyed what waiting expected, what your refusing to beg created in their defended psychology, and how silence accomplished what begging never could accomplish, breaking the pattern permanently. What they were waiting for, the expected script your silence refused to follow. Understanding what they expected helps you see what silence destroyed, revealing script they thought you'd follow and refusal that broke their defended strategy. They were waiting for you to prove the power dynamic they needed to believe. Your begging would confirm they held power through not needing while you were powerless through needing. They were waiting for proof, specific proof about power, about who had power and who lacked power in relationship dynamic. Throughout relationship, power was determined by who needed less, who could sustain distance longer, who could remain indifferent while other person pursued desperately. Power belonged to person who could withdraw without caring about withdrawal's impact. Powerlessness belonged to person who couldn't sustain withdrawal without desperately pursuing to end withdrawal. They needed you to be powerless person, needed you to be person who couldn't sustain distance, person who needed connection desperately enough to beg for connection, person whose desperation for relationship made you weak while their ability to withdraw made them strong. The needing you to be powerless served their ego, served their defended position, served their belief that independence is strength and dependence is weakness, served their worldview that whoever needs less wins and whoever needs more loses. Your begging would prove the dynamic, would prove they had power through being able to withdraw while remaining indifferent, would prove you lacked power through being unable to sustain withdrawal without desperately pursuing, would prove their defended position was superior position, because defended position could sustain distance, while your position couldn't sustain distance. Would prove independence is strength, because they could be independent, while you proved dependence is weakness, through begging for connection you couldn't live without. All proof, all confirmation, all validation of power dynamic they needed to believe existed. Your begging was supposed to provide proof, was supposed to confirm they held power, was supposed to validate that defended position was winning position because you'd break first, and begging proved breaking. But your silence refused the proof, refused to confirm power dynamic, refused to validate they held power through not needing, refused to prove you were powerless through needing. Your silence demonstrated opposite, demonstrated you could sustain distance, demonstrated you didn't need connection desperately enough to beg, demonstrated independence instead of dependence, demonstrated strength through sustaining withdrawal instead of weakness through desperately pursuing. Your silence proved power isn't yours. Power dynamic you needed to believe doesn't exist. I'm not powerless person who begs. I'm powerful person who chooses silence. I don't need you desperately. I can sustain distance indefinitely. I won't prove your defended superiority through my desperate inferiority. Your silence destroying expected proof is what happened. What their comfortable waiting didn't anticipate. What broke their defended certainty about power dynamic. They were waiting for you to do the emotional labor of reconnection. Begging would let them return without vulnerability of admitting they wanted to return. They were waiting for you to work. To do work of reconnecting, work of restoring closeness, work of rebuilding connection after distance they created, work of initiating contact, work of being vulnerable first, work of admitting you wanted relationship to continue. All work, all emotional labor, all vulnerability, all things they didn't want to do. Too scary to initiate, too vulnerable to admit wanting, too exposing to reach out first, too threatening to defended position to reveal they actually wanted connection they'd withdrawn from. So they waited for you to do it, waited for you to do the scary thing, the vulnerable thing, the exposing thing, the threatening thing, waited for you to initiate so they didn't have to initiate, waited for you to admit wanting so they didn't have to admit wanting, waited for you to reach out first so they didn't have to reach out first, waited for you to be vulnerable so they could remain defended. Your begging would serve them perfectly, would serve by you doing all emotional labor while they did none, you being vulnerable while they remained protected, you admitting need while they maintained appearance of not needing, you initiating reconnection while they simply responded to your initiation, you taking risk of rejection while they risked nothing, you proving you wanted relationship while they could return without proving they wanted relationship, all serving them, all letting them have reconnection without vulnerability, have closeness without admitting closeness mattered, have relationship continuing without revealing relationship continuation is what they wanted. Your begging was supposed to provide defended path back, path that didn't require them being vulnerable, path that let them return while maintaining defended appearance of indifference, path that served defended comfort through you doing all uncomfortable parts. But your silence eliminated the path, eliminated option of returning without vulnerability, eliminated ability to have reconnection without admitting wanting reconnection, eliminated defended route back that didn't require them initiating. Your silence meant if you want reconnection, initiate it. If you want closeness, admit wanting closeness. If you want relationship to continue, be vulnerable about wanting relationship. If you want connection restored, do emotional labor of restoring connection yourself. Your silence required vulnerability from them, required them being vulnerable first if they wanted reconnection, required them admitting they wanted what they'd withdrawn from, required them taking risk, required them doing work, required them being exposed, all requirements, all eliminating defended path back that your begging was supposed to provide. They were waiting for validation that withdrawal is effective control strategy. Your desperate pursuit would teach them distance controls you, encouraging future withdrawals. They were waiting for validation of strategy they'd use throughout relationship. Strategy of withdrawing to control, of creating distance to make you desperate, of going silent to make you pursue frantically. Strategy worked throughout relationship because your response made it work. Your pursuing after withdrawal validated that withdrawal creates pursuit. Your desperate closing of distance validated that distance creates desperation. Your frantic reaching out validated that silence creates frantic pursuit. All validating strategy, all teaching them that withdrawal is effective control mechanism, all encouraging continued use of strategy because strategy produced desired outcome, you pursuing, you desperate, you proving you needed them through being unable to sustain their absence. Your begging would validate strategy again, would validate that withdrawal still works. Distance still creates desperation. Silence still produces frantic pursuit. Strategy still controls. All validation, all teaching, all encouraging. Your begging would teach them to withdraw again in future, would teach that distance is effective tool for controlling relationship, would teach that going silent produces desired response of you pursuing desperately, would teach that strategy should be repeated because strategy works, would validate pattern, would ensure pattern's continuation, would guarantee future withdrawals because your begging would prove withdrawal is effective strategy for controlling you through creating desperation that makes you pursue. But your silence invalidated the strategy, invalidated it completely, invalidated by proving withdrawal doesn't create pursuit, distance doesn't create desperation, silence doesn't produce frantic reaching out, strategy doesn't work. Strategy fails when you don't respond predictably. Strategy loses all power when you choose silence over pursuing. Your silence taught opposite lesson, taught that withdrawal produces actual distance instead of producing pursuit that eliminates distance, taught that creating distance results in being distant instead of being pursued, taught that going silent creates actual silence instead of creating your frantic contact, taught that strategy doesn't work, taught that withdrawal has costs instead of benefits, taught that distance costs connection instead of controls connection, all teaching that invalidates strategy. That proves strategy failed. That demonstrates withdrawal doesn't control when person being withdrawn from chooses not to pursue. What actually happened when you stayed silent, the specific consequences your silence created. Understanding what silence produced helps you see what happened, revealing specific outcomes you're refusing to beg created in their defended psychology. Their comfortable certainty transformed into uncomfortable uncertainty. Silence eliminated predictability they depended on, creating anxiety they couldn't defend against. They were comfortable while waiting. Comfortable because waiting was based on certainty. Certainty about what would happen. Certainty you'd break first. Certainty you'd pursue. Certainty you'd beg. Certainty pattern would repeat because pattern always repeated. Certainty made waiting easy, made it defended, made it them sitting back, knowing exactly what would happen next, because what happened next was always same thing, you breaking, you pursuing, you begging. Certainty was comfort, was them not having to wonder, not having to worry, not having to question, not having to face any anxiety about outcome, because outcome was certain. You'd pursue, pattern would repeat, Defended position would be validated. All certain, all comfortable, all them waiting in defended certainty that made waiting feel safe and controlled. But your silence eliminated certainty, eliminated it immediately, eliminated it completely. Days passed without you breaking, weeks passed without you pursuing. Silence continued without you begging. Pattern didn't repeat, expected outcome didn't occur. Certainty dissolved into uncertainty, into them not knowing what would happen, into them wondering if you'd pursue, into them questioning whether pattern would repeat, into them facing anxiety about outcome that wasn't certain anymore. The uncertainty was uncomfortable. Was them experiencing, I don't know if she'll break, I don't know if she'll pursue, I don't know if pattern will repeat, I don't know what happens next, because what always happened next isn't happening. All uncomfortable, all anxiety creating, all defended position unable to defend against, because uncertainty can't be eliminated through defending, can only be eliminated through certainty returning, and certainty only returns if you pursue, and you're not pursuing. Your silence created what defending couldn't prevent: uncertainty, uncomfortable uncertainty, anxiety producing uncertainty, uncertainty that made them question everything. Question whether you'd come back, question whether relationship was over, question whether silence was permanent, question whether you'd moved on, question whether defended strategy failed. All questioning, all uncertainty, all anxiety they're comfortable waiting, didn't anticipate experiencing. All created by your silence refusing to provide certainty your begging was supposed to provide. They went from position of power to position of powerlessness. You choosing silence instead of begging reversed who controlled outcome, creating crisis they couldn't manipulate. They had power throughout relationship, had it through pattern, had it through your pursuing after their withdrawal, giving them power to determine when closeness returned through withdrawing, then eventually allowing your pursuit to restore closeness. Had it through your closing their distance, giving them power over intimacy levels, through creating distance, then permitting your bridging to restore intimacy. Had it through your predictable response to patterns, giving them power to control relationship dynamics, through patterns producing reliable outcomes. Power was central to defended position, was how defended position remained comfortable, was them controlling outcomes through patterns that made you respond predictably in ways that gave them control. But your silence reversed power, reversed it completely. You choosing silence meant they no longer controlled when closeness returned. You not closing distance meant they no longer controlled intimacy levels. You not responding predictably meant patterns no longer controlled relationship dynamics. Power shifted from them to you. Shifted because you controlled outcome now. You controlled whether relationship continued through your choosing silence over pursuing. You controlled whether connection returned through your choosing absence over bridging distance. You controlled everything through your silence, refusing to give them control, through refusing to respond to patterns that previously gave them control. The reversal was crisis, was them experiencing powerlessness, experiencing they couldn't control you anymore through withdrawal, experiencing patterns didn't produce outcomes, experiencing they had no power to make you pursue, no power to make you break, no power to make pattern repeat, all powerlessness, all crisis, all them facing that person who had power now was you, not them. And they couldn't manipulate powerlessness away, couldn't manipulate because manipulation requires access, and you eliminated access through silence. Couldn't talk you into pursuing because you weren't available to talk to. Couldn't promise change to prevent consequence because consequence was already occurring through silence, and you weren't available to prevent through promises. Couldn't negotiate their way out of powerlessness because negotiation requires communication, and you eliminated communication through complete silence. all inability to manipulate, all them facing powerlessness they couldn't eliminate through usual strategies, all crisis created by power, reversing through your silence, making you powerful and them powerless in ways they couldn't manipulate back to previous dynamic. Your thriving without them destroyed the narrative they needed to maintain. Visible evidence you were better without them eliminated their ego protection of believing you needed them. They needed specific narrative that protected ego, narrative that said, she needs me, she's worse without me, she can't thrive without relationship with me, she's struggling in my absence, she's miserable without connection to me. Narrative served ego protection, protected ego from facing, maybe she doesn't need me, maybe she's better without me, maybe I'm not as significant as I need to believe. Maybe my defended position cost me someone who's thriving without defended position weighing them down. Narrative prevented facing, prevented ego threat, prevented recognizing you might be fine, better than fine, thriving without them. Throughout relationship, you're pursuing validated narrative, validated that you needed them through pursuing, proving you couldn't sustain their absence. Validated they were significant through your desperate pursuit, proving their significance. But your silence accompanied by visible thriving destroyed narrative, destroyed it through evidence, through you being visibly better without them, visibly happier, visibly lighter, visibly thriving in ways you weren't thriving during relationship. Visible through social media, their monitoring, visible through mutual friends reporting, visible through your life they can see as flourishing in their absence, all visible evidence, all proving narrative was false, all destroying ego protection narrative provided. You're not struggling, you're thriving. You're not miserable, you're happy. You're not worse without them, you're better without them. You're not needing them. You're flourishing without needing them. All evidence, all undeniable, all destroying narrative that protected ego from facing you, don't need them. The destruction created crisis about significance, created them facing, she doesn't need me, she's better without me, I'm not significant to her well-being. My absence improved her life instead of damaging her life. She's thriving without me proving I was weight not benefit. All ego-destroying recognition, all facing they couldn't avoid because evidence was visible, was undeniable, was you thriving in ways that made clear you were better without them than you were with them. Your visible thriving while silent destroyed narrative, destroyed ego protection, created crisis about significance, created them facing they're not needed in ways their ego needed to believe they were needed. They realized pattern wouldn't repeat. Recognition that this silence was different created panic about permanence they couldn't prevent. They waited for pattern to repeat. Waited certain it would repeat because it always repeated. Days passed. Pattern didn't repeat. Weeks passed. Still no pattern. You remained silent. You stayed absent. You continued thriving. Pattern wasn't repeating, wasn't showing any signs of repeating, wasn't giving any indication it would repeat. Recognition slowly formed into facing that this silence was different. This withdrawal wasn't like previous withdrawals where you eventually pursued. This distance wasn't like previous distance where you eventually closed gap. This was different. This was you choosing silence permanently. This was you not planning to pursue. This was pattern being broken instead of pattern repeating. This was permanent instead of temporary. The recognition created panic about permanence, about silence being permanent, about you being gone permanently, about relationship being over permanently, about pattern being broken permanently instead of repeating temporarily like pattern always repeated before. Panic was them facing, She's not coming back. She's not going to pursue. She's not going to beg. Pattern won't repeat. This is permanent. Relationship is over. I lost her. All panic. All about permanence. All about facing that their comfortable waiting was waiting for something that wasn't coming. That your silence was permanent choice, not temporary state. That pattern was broken permanently, not paused temporarily. That you were gone and staying gone. And they couldn't prevent permanence. Couldn't prevent because preventing required you changing your mind, and you weren't available to have your mind changed. Couldn't talk you out of permanence because you were silent. Couldn't promise change to prevent permanence because permanence was already occurring. Couldn't manipulate you into making silence temporary because manipulation requires access, and access didn't exist. All inability to prevent. All them facing permanence they couldn't stop. All panic about recognizing pattern won't repeat, and they can't make pattern repeat because you chose silence permanently, and silence eliminates their ability to prevent permanence. The uncomfortable mirror turn. If knowing what happened to them feels satisfying, examine whether you're healing or still attached through wanting their suffering. But examine why knowing what happened to them matters. Why knowing their certainty became uncertainty feels important. Why knowing they went from powerful to powerless creates response in you. Why knowing their narrative was destroyed feels satisfying. Why knowing they're panicking about permanence affects you. Because if you're genuinely choosing yourself, if you're genuinely healed, if you're genuinely moved forward, what happened to them should be irrelevant. Shouldn't matter that they're uncomfortable. Shouldn't concern you that they're powerless. Shouldn't feel important that their ego was threatened. Shouldn't create satisfaction that they're panicking. Your silence should be about you, about protecting you, about healing you, about choosing you, about building without them, not about creating consequences for them, not about making them uncomfortable, not about reversing power, not about destroying their narrative, not about creating their panic. If what happened to them feels satisfying, you're still attached, still oriented toward them, still organized around their response, still making your healing about how silence affected them instead of about how silence serves you, still connected through wanting their suffering, through feeling validated by their discomfort, through being satisfied by their crisis, through caring about impact on them, all keeping you attached, all preventing complete detachment, all making silence about them instead of about you. Stop caring what happened to them. Stop feeling satisfied by their consequences. Stop being affected by their crisis. Stop organizing around impact on them. Orient toward yourself, toward what silence accomplished for you, protected you, gave you space to heal, created boundary keeping you safe from patterns, allowed you to build without their defended position, preventing building. Choose silence that serves you independent of what silence created for them. Choose healing that's about your well-being, not about their suffering. Choose moving forward that's complete without their crisis being part of completion. Choose yourself so completely what happened to them becomes genuinely irrelevant. Their uncertainty doesn't validate you. Your certainty about choosing yourself validates you. Their powerlessness doesn't empower you. Your choosing yourself empowers you. Their destroyed narrative doesn't prove your worth. Your building proves your worth. Their panic doesn't create your peace. Your moving forward creates your peace. All separate, all independent, all your silence serving you whether consequences for them occurred or not. Why your silence accomplished what begging never could. The permanent transformation refusing to pursue created. Understanding what silence achieved helps you see what begging prevented, revealing permanent changes your staying silent created that pursuing maintained impossible. Silence broke the pattern permanently instead of reinforcing pattern temporarily. Begging would have validated pattern works. Silence proved pattern failed completely. Throughout relationship, pattern repeated endlessly. Repeated because your response made it repeat. They withdrew, you pursued, they allowed reconnection, closeness returned temporarily, then they withdrew again. Cycle repeated. Repeated because you're pursuing after withdrawal, validated that withdrawal produces desired outcome. Validated that pattern works. Validated that they could withdraw and relationship would continue because you'd always pursue to restore connection. Your pursuing reinforced pattern. Made pattern sustainable. Made withdrawal feel like effective strategy because withdrawal produced your pursuit, which restored connection, which let them withdraw again, knowing you'd pursue again. Pattern was endless cycle, was sustainable cycle, was cycle that continued through your pursuing, making withdrawal cost-free for them while costing you everything: dignity, energy, self-respect, wholeness. But your silence broke the cycle, broke it permanently, broke it by not pursuing, by not providing response that made pattern work, by not validating withdrawal as effective strategy, by not making withdrawal cost-free. Your silence meant withdrawal has costs now, costs of actual distance, costs of actual separation, costs of relationship actually ending instead of continuing through my pursuing, costs that make withdrawal ineffective instead of effective, costs that make pattern fail instead of succeed. Your silence proved pattern doesn't work, proved it definitively, proved it permanently, proved withdrawal doesn't produce pursuit when person being withdrawn from chooses self instead of choosing pursuing. Proved distance doesn't get closed when person whose distance is being created chooses distance instead of choosing bridging. Proved pattern fails completely when response changes from pursuing to silence. The breaking was permanent. Was you ending cycle that seemed endless? Was you proving pattern doesn't have to repeat? Was you demonstrating that refusing to pursue breaks pattern in ways pursuing never breaks pattern? Begging would have reinforced, would have made pattern repeat again, would have validated that withdrawal still works, would have ensured future withdrawals because this withdrawal produced desired outcome of you begging. But silence broke pattern, broke cycle, broke endless repetition, broke it permanently by proving pattern fails when response is silence instead of pursuit. Breaking is permanent because you can't unbreak, can't return to pattern once pattern is proven failed, can't make cycle repeat once cycle is broken through your refusal to provide response that makes cycle function. Silence transformed you from pursuer to person who chooses self, permanent identity shift that changes how you respond to defended patterns forever. Throughout relationship, you were pursuer, were person who pursued, person who closed distance, person who restored connection, person who did emotional labor, person who broke first, person who needed desperately, person who begged, person whose identity was shaped by role pattern assigned you, role of pursuer, role of desperate person, role of weak person, role of dependent person, role of person who always broke first and proved breaking through pursuing. Identity was formed through pattern, through repeatedly playing role pattern required, through being person who pursues because pattern needs pursuer to function, through absorbing identity of pursuer, through repeatedly pursuing. But your silence transformed identity, transformed it fundamentally. You became different person, became person who chooses self, who refuses to pursue, who sustains distance, who maintains silence, who protects self instead of abandoning self through desperate pursuing, who prioritizes well-being instead of prioritizing relationship with person whose patterns harm well-being, who is strong instead of weak, who is independent instead of dependent, who is self-respecting instead of self-abandoning. All transformation, all you becoming person you weren't before. Person who doesn't pursue defended people. Person who chooses self when patterns emerge. Person who walks away instead of begging. Person who protects instead of pursuing. The transformation is permanent, is fundamental identity shift, is you becoming person who will respond differently to defended patterns forever. Not just in this relationship, in all future relationships, in all future encounters with defended behavior. Transformation changed who you are, changed how you respond, changed your identity from pursuer to person who chooses self. The transformation means future defended people won't get pursuer, will get person who chooses self, will get person who walks away instead of begging, will get person who maintains silence instead of desperately pursuing, will get person transformed by having chosen self once in ways that make choosing self automatic future response. Begging would have maintained old identity, would have kept you being pursuer, would have reinforced that you're person who pursues, would have prevented transformation. But silence created transformation, created permanent identity shift, created you becoming person you weren't, person who chooses self, person transformed forever by having stayed silent instead of begging. Silence proved self-worth independent of their validation. Choosing yourself despite their withholding created self-validation that external validation could never create. Throughout relationship, worth felt dependent on their validation, felt like your value required their recognition, felt like you needed them to see worth for worth to exist, felt like their validation determined whether you were valuable, felt like worth was external, was something given by them through their validation, was something you didn't possess unless they recognized possession. The dependence made their withholding devastating, made their not validating create doubt, made their patterns make you question value, made their defended position make you feel worthless, made you desperate for validation, desperate enough to beg, desperate enough to pursue, desperate enough to prove worth through doing anything to make them validate. All desperation, all based on worth being dependent on their validation, all making you vulnerable to manipulation through withholding, all giving them power through your needing their validation to feel valuable. But your silence proved worth is independent, proved it through choosing yourself despite their withholding validation, proved value exists regardless of their recognition, proved you're worthy independent of them seeing worth, proved choosing yourself validates worth in ways their validation never validated worth, because choosing yourself required recognizing worth first, required knowing you're valuable enough to choose, required believing you deserve better than relationship with person who withholds validation, required self-validation, required you validating yourself independent of whether they validated you, required internal recognition of worth, required you seeing value they didn't see, required you knowing worth they didn't acknowledge. All self-validation, all internal worth recognition, all you proving to yourself that you're valuable through choosing yourself. Self-validation is permanent, is worth that doesn't depend on external validation, is value that persists when others withhold recognition, is knowing you're worthy regardless of whether anyone else sees worth, is confidence that can't be destroyed by others not validating, is foundation that's internal instead of external, is you being source of your own worth instead of looking to others to provide worth. Your silence created self-validation, created it by forcing you to recognize worth yourself since they wouldn't recognize worth, created it by requiring you to validate yourself to have strength to choose yourself, created permanent shift from external validation dependence to internal self-validation. The shift means future withholding won't devastate, future non-recognition won't create doubt, future defended people won't have power through withholding validation, because validation is internal now, is self-generated, is you validating yourself independent of whether anyone else validates. Silence created this, created permanent self-validation that begging would have prevented by keeping validation external and dependent. Silence created space for genuine healing that pursuing prevented. Distance from patterns allowed processing relationship honestly instead of remaining in defended dysfunction. Throughout relationship, healing was impossible because you were still in patterns, still experiencing defended dysfunction, still being hurt by patterns while patterns were occurring, still absorbing costs of defended position while defended position was active, still pursuing while pursuing prevented processing, still in relationship that was preventing healing from relationship. Healing requires distance, requires space from what harmed you, requires not being actively harmed while trying to heal from harm, requires processing relationship honestly without relationship preventing honest processing, requires recognizing patterns without patterns actively operating, requires seeing dysfunction clearly without dysfunction clouding seeing, requires distance creating perspective. All impossible while relationship continued, all prevented by pursuing, by begging, by maintaining connection that prevented healing from connection. But your silence created space, created distance, created separation from patterns, created absence from defended dysfunction, created you being away from what harmed you so you could heal from what harmed you, created space where processing could occur, where honest evaluation could happen, where patterns could be seen clearly without patterns actively occurring to cloud seeing, where dysfunction could be recognized without dysfunction preventing recognition, where healing could begin because healing prevention through active relationship was eliminated through silence. The space was what made healing possible, was what allowed processing, was what created perspective, was distance making visible what proximity kept invisible, was absence making clear what presence kept confused, was silence allowing healing that pursuing prevented. Genuine healing occurred in space, occurred through processing honestly, through seeing patterns clearly, through recognizing defended dysfunction, through understanding how relationship harmed you, through facing what you accommodated, through recognizing what you tolerated, through seeing clearly how defended position cost you, through honest evaluation of relationship without relationship preventing honest evaluation, through all the processing pursuing prevented, because pursuing kept you in relationship that made processing impossible. Your silence created space. Space created healing. Healing transformed you into a person who's processed, who's healed, who's clear, who sees patterns, who recognizes dysfunction, who won't return to what harmed because healing made undeniable what harmed. All healing, all created through silence, all impossible if you'd begged, because begging would have prevented space that made healing possible. The permanent truth about what happened when you stayed silent, they waited for you to break, to pursue, to beg, to prove pattern would repeat, to validate power dynamic, to provide defended path back, to confirm withdrawal strategy worked. They waited comfortably. They waited certainly. They were wrong. You stayed silent, stayed completely silent, stayed permanently silent, stayed silent in ways that refused to follow script, refused to prove power dynamic, refused to provide defended path, refused to validate strategy, refused to make pattern repeat. Your silence created specific outcomes, created their comfortable certainty becoming uncomfortable uncertainty, created their power becoming powerlessness, created their narrative being destroyed by visible evidence you thrived without them, created their waiting for repetition becoming panic about permanence. All outcomes, all created by your staying silent instead of begging, What happened was, pattern broke. Permanently broke. Broke through your silence, refusing to play role pattern assigned you. Role of pursuer, role of beggar, role of person who breaks first, role of powerless person who needs desperately, while they remain powerful person who doesn't need. Your silence refused the role, refused to pursue, refused to beg, refused to break, refused to be powerless, refused everything pattern required from you. Refusal broke pattern, broke it permanently, broke it in ways that created crisis for them, crisis of uncertainty, of powerlessness, of ego threat, of permanence they couldn't prevent. But crisis for them isn't why silence mattered. Silence mattered because silence served you, served by protecting you from pattern that was harming you, served by creating space for healing pattern was preventing, served by giving you boundary pattern was violating, served by letting you build pattern was interrupting, served you completely. They waited for begging. You stayed silent. Silence created what begging never created, permanent break from pattern, permanent choice of yourself, permanent protection from defended position that was costing you your wholeness, permanent freedom to build without patterns preventing building, all permanent, all created through silence, all serving you whether consequences for them occurred or not. What happened when you stayed silent was, you chose yourself. You broke pattern. You protected yourself. You created boundary. You began healing. You started building. All you. All for you. All about you choosing yourself over playing role pattern assigned you. They waited for begging that would validate defended position. You stayed silent in ways that validated choosing yourself. Only your validation matters. Only your choosing yourself matters. Only your healing matters. Only your building matters. All created through silence. All permanent. All you choosing yourself completely. What happened was freedom. Your freedom. Freedom from pattern. Freedom from role. Freedom from pursuing someone who withdrew. Freedom from begging someone who withheld. Freedom from playing script that served them while harming you. Freedom created through silence, through staying silent when they expected begging, through choosing yourself when they expected you choosing them, through pursuing, through protecting yourself when they expected you abandoning yourself through begging. What happened was, you became free, free through silence, free through choosing, free through staying silent, and letting that silence be permanent choice of yourself over pattern that required abandoning yourself. They waited. You stayed silent. You became free. That's what happened. That's what mattered. That's permanent truth about silence. Silence freed you completely. And freedom continues. Continues through you maintaining silence. Continues through you staying chosen. Continues through you protecting boundary. Continues through you building without them. Continues through you being free person instead of being pursuer pattern required. Freedom is permanent state now, is you living without patterns, living without defending against defended position, living without pursuing withdrawn person, living without begging withholder, living without playing role that harmed you, living free, living whole, living chosen, living yourself, all freedom, all permanent, all continuing, all created through staying silent when they waited for begging. Your silence created freedom. Your maintaining silence maintains freedom. Your staying chosen keeps you free. That's what happened. That's permanent truth. They waited for begging that would keep you trapped in pattern. You stayed silent and became permanently free.